Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Velero community meeting and open discussion. Today, we got a bunch of status updates that we want to go through, and then we have a few interesting discussion topics as well from community members Vitta and Christoph. So let's dive into it. And if you have anything you want to add to the meeting notes, please do so. I'm going to share the link to the meeting notes in the chat there. And then I'll share my screen so you all can see what I'm looking at. All right. So for today's status updates, Ashish, you're going first.
Cool. So I was in community support last week. Quite a lot of issues. It was pretty quiet. Mostly questions about restic and stuff. So I had some time to do other stuff. I moved or I have PRs open to move all our plugin repositories to use Go modules. So I have those PRs out, and then I also started working on like moving moving our CIs from Travis to GitHub Actions. As an example, I did the Microsoft Azure plugin. And once that's merged, everything else should be pretty straightforward. And then the other things were, yeah, I saw an issue being opened up um, for the feature flags on Helm, or using feature flags on our Helm repositories or our Helm charts. So I have a PR out to fix that. And last week there were also like a couple of asks for like a dashboard for Velero. So over the weekend I spent like a couple of hours putting together or getting started on like a Octant plugin for Velero. So it's like pretty bare bones at this point, but something for folks to work on if they're interested. Contribute with ideas, PRs, issues, feature requests, all welcome. So that's all I have as status updates.
Awesome. That's really cool. An Octant plugin for Velero. I like it. Any questions, comments for Ashish? All right. Then next up we have Carlisia.
Hello. Excuse me. So we have now a Velero maintainers user group on the Slack channel, Velero channel, and Stephanie is not there yet because there was a change with Slack ID, and the tool that does that automation was not accounting for that. But they have a PR, they're changing it. So Stephanie, you're going to be added to that group as well. And so I got to the end of the tunnel with migrating the BSL CRD to kubebuilder and having Velero work end to end. And now pretty much I just have to change the tests. So I'm assuming we still want this, and I should have a PR for it tomorrow latest. That's it. It was a bit of work because the BSL gets passed through half or more than half of the controllers we have. So it was a lot of places to change. That's it.
That's great. Any questions, comments for Carlisia?
I have not had a chance to take a look at any of the kubebuilder stuff yet. Hopefully, I don't know if I'll be able to get to it today, but if not, I think I should definitely be able to do it tomorrow. So definitely interested to check it out.
Yeah, my recommendation is don't bother with it, because when I don't have a PR for this yet. So when I do open a PR, I'm going to have some explanations, and it'll make it easier for you to understand.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I thought there was a PR and I missed that.
I had a branch. I have a branch going. So whatever link I put out there was just my branch.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Steve.
Yeah, not too much for me. I was out the second half of last week, so not a lot of updates since last meeting. I'm on community support this week, and basically just getting ready for the 1.4 release. Quick update on that. We are currently planning to push that out next Tuesday. So next Monday is Memorial Day. It's a holiday for folks in the US. So assuming we don't encounter any major issues this week, we'll plan to ship that release on Tuesday, next Tuesday. And then beyond that, just continuing to talk about 1.5 planning and beyond. And I think Stephanie will talk a little bit more about that next. So that's all for me.
All right. Yeah, I don't think, are there any questions here for Steve? All right, then Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, like Steve mentioned, we are working on doing the 1.5 plus release planning. We are also looking forward to the future towards getting at least a 3-month roadmap for Velero put together. A lot of really interesting items on the roadmap, including running concurrent workloads, so worker pods improvements, some Caymanization work, Rustic work, of course, that's come up a few times. We are also looking toward the future for potential multi-tenancy support, working further on those CSI snapshotter improvements. We also have up on there a lot of the improvements coming out of the community. Some of the install config UX that Carlisia has been working on, some advanced restore scenarios, performance and scale improvements, some snapshotter improvements, as well as even some plugin and infrastructure improvements, and AZ and region backup restore. A lot of really interesting kind of topics. And to that end, we're also looking for opportunities to make sure that this roadmap is visible and surfaced to the community. We saw a couple questions come up about that last week. So we'll make sure to keep you all updated when those pieces are published and available.
Do you have any, so this will all be collected in a longer roadmap document, or how will this be presented?
So we're working on that right now. The team does have a longer form sort of roadmap document put together. Right now, we've got a lot of those topics that I mentioned listed on that document, and we're working on the team prioritization of that. And once we've gone through those exercises, we'll settle on a format and kind of let everyone know where they can find those details.
Sounds good. And how would someone from the community come up with an idea for the 1.5 release?
That's a great question. So we are also looking for providing details on how we can get feedback from the community on the roadmap release, because we definitely want to hear from everyone on those pieces. We are looking at kind of publishing more of that or making it more visible on GitHub. Potentially, maybe we'll create a document and publish it there so that the community has the idea, and provide the link here in the community meeting.
That sounds great. Any questions, comments for Stephanie and the 1.5 release planning? I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that when 1.4 has landed and we're gearing up for 1.5. All right, awesome. Next up, we have Nolan.
Hey, so last week I don't have a whole lot to go into with what I did. Mostly 1.4 testing. The link there is just a spreadsheet of test cases that I've thrown together. I was going to do it in a wiki page, but GitHub Markdown tables are kind of hard to read and edit. So at least from the editing side, they're hard to line up columns. So I just threw together a spreadsheet. So I've made some scripts that are running through different scenarios against each of these Kubernetes versions and running 5 backups per Kubernetes version. Double check stuff. I'm probably going to throw those all of those scripts and stuff into a repo so people can reproduce those. I don't know that that will all make it into our CI enhancements, just because there's a lot of stuff for setting up time and such that we don't need. But so far things are looking pretty good. The main use case I'll want to hit is when we don't have any feature flags on, to make sure our experience is good for folks using it in the common case. But we do want to make sure our CSI mode and this API, the enable API group versions flags are working, but they will be behind feature flags. So that new functionality won't be affecting most people. Other than that, working on the 1.40 blog posts, got some edits from the team, and been doing some reviews, but not a huge update for me this week.
All right. Yeah, I think having those test scripts and everything out there in the open so everyone else can help out in testing in different environments, I think that would be super helpful going forward as well. Any other questions, comments for Nolan? All right, then we'll dive into the discussion topics for the week. So the first one here is from Vitta, who would like to have a high-level walkthrough of this PR. Vitta, do you want to unmute and talk a little about this one?
Yep, Jonas. Yeah, thanks for that. And can you click on that link? Yeah. So the fake files changed. So okay, basically this PR is for the volume snapshot. As how can it let know the users the progress on the backup and restore operations that it is performing. I mean, right now we have a restic pod volume backup and pod volume restore. So yeah, this PR is like to have a way for that one. And in the files changed, yeah. So the idea here is like similar to pod volume backup and restore. I mean, the proposal here talks about like having a new CR, which the plugin can create, the volume snapshotter can create, and basically the plugin, the Velero server, after calling it comes and the create snapshot after that call, then it can actually sync it up to the back it up to the backup location along with the other CRs. So if we scroll down, yes, this is the think of something called as volume plugin backup CR. So which have the volume name and the plugin name, the backup it is part of right now currently doing, and then the status is what shows the progress of it, and the snapshot ID, any errors in the message in terms of whatever it not convey, and start completion timestamps. And then the next lines are about like where can we do it, like basically as part of create snapshot call when it is done from the Velero server. So the snapshotter creates it, and once the call is done, the Velero server can actually pick it and persist it to the backup location, and user can actually get it by using label search or by going to the CR, the backup name and volume name, by which a user can know like what is the progress what is the progress on the thing, and also if it fails, the status part, and that kind of details. And similarly goes in the same lines, the restore part also, where we have the CR, and then basically here we create the volume from snapshot. So the snapshot ID is what we'll provide it. And this will be same as the one given in the Velero describe backup output, and the backup name, and then the status shows how it is progressing. So any comments, just like first thoughts on this, or I mean, it may
So
not be, yeah, please.
I think you mentioned at the beginning, you said that the plugins would be responsible for creating this CR. Is that right?
Exactly, that's true. Plugin is the one responsible for creating it. Yeah, so, okay, the introduction part, it talks about that, yes. And yeah, the unique issues with Velero plugin, the snapshot is like it better to have uniform way across the plugins, and then the backup information you want to know. User need to know during restore time. The user doesn't know how much is the backup size, so that details will be available once we sync them in the destination cluster as well, right? So, yes.
Okay, and so right now we do upload some information to object storage in a file, a volume snapshots file about the snapshots that are taken through the volume snapshotters. Is the idea that this CRD would replace that information?
No, this will be extra. This will be like new information along with that. This shows the progress and the size of the backup and the details.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not going to replace any existing files. Those are like really useful, and this will give more information. So only thing I would say limitation is like the plugin has to be the Kubernetes native. So it have to know how to create a CR and things like it can be. Right now, it is designed such a way that it doesn't need to depend on it. So Velero server can actually find that if no such CR exists, there is no need to push it to the object storage. So that is also fine.
Got it. And then, so are there changes required to core Velero? I mean, presumably we would want to display this information in the CLI in the describe output.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think that's also a good idea. I not cover the CLI here. Yeah, that can be extension for this for sure. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, that would probably have to be a core thing right now because we don't have any framework for client-side plugins. So we have to test for the custom resource, and if it's not there, then we just don't do anything. But
yeah.
Vishnu, I have a question on do you know if the Maya data implementations for CSI have any kind of progress report information here that Velero could hook into? I'm wondering if there's a disconnect here, or if you're just interested in the Velero API at the moment.
Is this the one which Kiran just sent email? Is that regarding it, or sorry, no? Can you repeat the question, Nolan?
Yeah. So, well, let me back up. Does Maya Data have a CSI plugin with volume snapshotting?
We have CSI driver for volume provisioning. So that's there. That is the OpenEBS volumes will be provisioned through the CSI driver. But the plugin right now we have the Velero plugin. It is not based on the CSI one.
Gotcha. So I guess my question was building to would there be a mechanism for reporting for CSI based volume snapshots? But it sounds like right now this is solely focused on the Velero volume snapshotter.
Yes, that is true.
Plugins, and then we would have to find some other way, probably working with the data protection working group to report any kind of CSI. Okay.
That's true. That's exactly the case. Yes.
Okay.
So the point with Velero plugin we are doing is we send the data. I mean, the plugin does send it to the object storage, stores it there. So we, I mean, the OpenEBS have variants, couple of variants. Like one is based on ZFS, which does this streaming ZFS send and receive streams to the object storage, and it also does incremental. That's currently we have. So CS, I think we have to get anything near there. Yeah. And another thing, the Velero actually gives us the entire application perspective it does. I mean, the CSI, when we take it, it's only the volume specific. I mean, but the Velero gives you the application view, which is like much needed for the end users.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how easy would it be for us to extend this in for CSI as well? Is that something that you have thought about in your implementation or design?
No, Ashish, I hadn't thought in that way. Yeah. So I mentioned few of the alternatives which I thought of. Maybe we'll just go to the PR. So it says like, so other ways like the Velero server itself can do a regular polling so that it works with non-Kubernetes native plugins also, but it will be too much of changes. And the other is having the restrictions on the name. So which is like the whatever it creates snapshot return value, that is the snapshot ID that can be used to know what is the CR it's created. That's another restriction. But I think this sounds better whatever I had currently. Okay, so what should be the next steps possibly? I'm just new to this process. So I'm just thinking. We'll discuss more on the Slack or on the bug or issue, or how is it? Any timelines? Or I mean, just wanted to know about it.
Yeah, so I think, you know, all the maintainers certainly will need to take a slightly more detailed read through this and add any questions and comments that we have based on that. And, you know, anyone else who's interested in this as well should feel free to put a review on the PR. So, you know, ideally we can, through that, just sort of get in sync on the intended design. And once we can get the design doc approved, then we'd be okay to move forward to implementation.
Sure.
I definitely, you know, the first alternative that you mentioned around adding another method to the volume snapshotter interface, that was one thing that kind of occurred to me as another way to do this. So, you know, I see what you've written here, and I definitely want to think about it a little bit and just make sure that, you know, going with a CRD approach makes sense versus that.
Right. So this is very less changes to the core Velero, and yeah, I think we can judge it. We can weigh it based on the requirements. So, and I just want to also inform that I will be like, we'll be able to get to the implementation once we are interested to get to the implementation as well. Once it is once it gets merged.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And that'll definitely help make progress more quickly.
Yeah, perfect. That's it from my side. I think anything else.
This is great. Thank you so much for your proposal here, Vitta.
Welcome to us. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Christoph. Christoph wants to talk about non-existing items that should not cause backup to be partially failed.
Yes, hello everyone. It was recommended that I bring this issue forward. This is something that me and my group has kind of hit while using Velero from a user perspective, where backups are reporting partially failed when in our specific case, which is, it looks like something that other users have hit as well, where a pod is pending and a PVC is never created for the pod. So it's attempting to back up a PVC that does not actually exist on the system. It looks like there was some discussion, and then the issue just kind of stalled out without an exact consensus from folks. So I wanted to bring it back up again and see if there was able to be a consensus reached. I know there's also a PR open that's related to this that would again fix my specific case that I hit, where if a pod is in pending status, don't try and back up. Don't associate its PVCs for backup like attached to the pod. If the PVCs are, inside the namespace scope separately, they'll still be backed up, but they wouldn't necessarily be backed up like as attached to the pod.
Yeah, so I mean, I can definitely jump in with my opinion here. I mean, I personally don't think we should flag these things as warnings or cause the backup to go into failure. And we did talk about this before, but if you have a pod that references I guess there are a couple of different cases, but the easiest one for me to think about is a pod that references a PVC that doesn't exist in the cluster. And so, previously some folks said, okay, so if you have a pod that's supposed to be using a PVC, but that PVC doesn't exist, we should warn the user who's trying to create the backup somehow. And I guess my personal opinion is that it's not Velero's job to flag sort of invalid configurations, and we should just back up what's there. And if the pod is referencing a PVC that doesn't exist, we should just detect that, back up the pod. We can certainly put a log statement in that indicates that the PVC doesn't exist, so we couldn't back it up, but I don't think it represents a backup failure per se.
It's more of a partial success rather than partial failure, right? That's a more accurate term of what this is.
I was just going to say, and I've seen some similar things. It seems to me that I don't mind warning there. I mean, it makes sense. So you might want to warn the user, but if the backup succeeded in backing up what was there, that's a success. And also, we use it more in the context of migrating from one cluster to another. If you're migrating from cluster A to cluster B, and you had a pod that referencing that didn't exist, therefore it's not currently functional in cluster A. When you migrate to cluster B with the backup and restore, the issue with it failing is that we have other partial failures that would represent, hey, this failed, don't trust it, go back and do it again, versus this case where, we couldn't back up something that didn't exist because it was invalid, but everything else that was valid got backed up successfully. That's a success from the point of view of trying to, either back up or migrate what's currently functional. And the point of, Velero's job isn't to validate the cluster, it's to back up what is currently functional in the cluster.
Okay. Sounds a bit like you're saying the same thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, mostly. I guess I would just say, in terms of it was said that we shouldn't be warning or producing an error. From my point of view, whether we log it as a backup warning or not is less important to me. But seeing it as a failed backup, is an issue, because our migration tool, detects that failure and says, hey, we can't move forward. The backup failed. So yeah, so I guess I'm in total agreement. I don't think this should cause a partially failed condition. Whether we log warnings or not is less important to me. It's fine either way.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the input. And then I think there are a couple of different ways we could, if we want to make this change, that we could go about it. I mean, we could focus on the specific case of a pod that's, either pending or referencing a non-existent PVC, and checking for those conditions. Or we could change the backup code that gets, basically gets additional items returned from plugins, which I think is where this tends to come up. And basically anytime an additional item is returned, Velero could check and see if that item actually exists before trying to back it up. And if it doesn't exist, basically not logging an error, not creating an error in a backup failure. So, you know, one is a little bit more narrow in scope, one is a little bit more general. I'm not totally sure which approach would make sense, but I think it sounds like
the more general one, because
yeah.
you know, I'm trying to remember where I hit this before, and I think the case I saw was in a different use case. It was relating to OpenShift specific resources around image stream and image stream tags, where you might have a tag that references another tag, and that connection. And again, it's been a few months, but I think I had a case where, you know, you created an image stream tag to reference another tag, and then you deleted the original tag, but it was the one that was still there was valid. It's just that it referenced something that was no longer valid, and that was causing an error in the backup as a result. And so the more general approach of, like you said, that we're using the related associated items, and basically if that item doesn't exist, you ignore it or you warn, but you don't create an error, I think would make more sense.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this come up with role bindings and cluster role bindings that are referring to non-existent roles or cluster roles. I think that's the other case we've seen pretty regularly.
I was just reading through the comments. I think Adnan made a kind of a pretty valid comment about if we mark this as completed instead of partially failed, that may kind of mislead the user into thinking that the backup has everything that it needs. And on restore, when it is time to restore, it's like the restore is not successful, or like the cluster is not, or their application is not in a state that they expected it to be, because they expected the backup to be complete and everything should be fine. But that would be like a violation of what the customer or the user might expect. So that is something that I think we should kind of think about.
Yeah, it's unless we have like some sort of accounting that tells us like this PVC should not be missing, it's hard really to know. Because I've struggled with this issue, because that's a valid point that like a user could be like, hey, why the backup says completed, but my application still doesn't run because I don't have everything. But on the same token, I agree with Steve and Scott's point that like it's not Valero's job to say your cluster's misconfigured. You're missing stuff. Valero is just like, oh, I'm backing up everything that's here. You just happen to be pointing at something that's non-existent. I'm not sure how to bridge that gap.
I mean, it almost seems like, you know, if you were talking about, for example, you know, you're backing up a file system and you had a symlink to something that didn't exist. It's not a failed backup if you copied the symlink and it did. I guess that's what my thinking there. And also the question is on restore. Can you restore this thing? You know, because if we're saying instead of calling it a partially failed backup, if we call it successful, if you go back in then and restore this backup, do you get everything that you started with, or are there things that you're actually missing because of that? I think that would also be relevant to actually see, you know, in practice with the particular case we're talking about here.
This is Rafael. I agree. Especially in large clusters with like hundreds of tenants, the cluster admin cannot be punished by a bad tenant doing, you know, a massive namespace. If we perhaps want to make some distinction about objects, I would be more, as a cluster admin, I'll be more concerned if my cluster level object has a problem. But I don't care about jobs, pods, and so on, because I cannot control my users. Does it make sense?
That might also point to, you know, instead of ignoring these issues listed as a warning on the backup. So if you want to look into this, you'll see the list of warnings, but it doesn't list. It's still a completed backup, so you can consider it a success. But you have access to those warnings if you want to look at and actually see what happened there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. If we change this to make it so the backup is successful in a case like that, what would be the best? In Scott, you just said the warning would be good. Rafael, I wanted to get your perspective. What would be the most useful way for us to let the user know? Would it be maybe a separate phase to indicate that, hey, we expected to find this, but it wasn't there, or just a warning? Or something else?
Warnings are good. The thing is, maybe we have to discuss different flavors of successful. It will be a knob or something, but in large clusters, when you have thousands of objects and then you do all or nothing, successful is kind of hard, right? Back at my experience, I had absolutely no control what the users did in their namespaces, and was really weird stuff. And then you just saying that, you know, your backup failed because of like a, you know, a misconfigured pod is kind of like maybe a little bit misguided. Maybe you can do like successful with warnings. I'll be more concerned about really cluster objects, like maybe like a namespace that's not in a hanging state. That'll be perhaps a more serious case than a pod pending, right?
But in a case where the admin is aware that this could happen and they wanted to dig for it, surface these cases to look at it at some point, would warnings be enough? Do you need some extra metadata in the backup?
I think so. The warning must happen on the log, right? Cannot ignore the warning. Maybe create a second status a little bit. Maybe you have like a high level status and then a second more granular status field, perhaps. Like with maybe with some of the stats. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
So
yeah, this is exactly what I'm trying to brainstorm.
I mean, we could certainly try and add more phases, but that, you know, potentially you end up with a whole bunch of very sort of similar sounding phases. I mean, what we do right now is we count how many warnings were logged, and we write the count onto the backup status. So, you know, if we were to log this as a warning, then at the end of the backup CR would be updated to show, you know, phase of completed, but it would have a warning count of greater than 0. Mm-hmm. So that would be a field on the CR, and it's displayed through the CLI.
And this is also the case where, again, for restores right now, those warnings are also shown, you describe, and if we talked about this in previous weeks, how the described behavior is different on backup and restore. If the backup describe could include the warnings as well, it will be a little more visible.
We also have warnings, like if you do a whole cluster restore, Velero often generates warnings for its own CRDs. So like backup storage locations and backups, like the custom resource definitions already exist in the cluster, and Velero will try to take those out of the backup and put them in. So like those warnings, we should really clean up somehow, because you don't want those to be false flags. But in terms of phases, like I'm unsure about adding a ton of gradations, because like in talking about like, should it be completed, partially completed, or partially failed, like or should we have both? Like I'm thinking about the difference between partially sunny and partly sunny, partly cloudy, like
half empty, half full.
Right, like
I think completed with warnings, like one of the suggestions that Steve had, that seemed like a pretty good self-explanatory phase.
Yeah,
I think so too.
Yeah, I think completed with warnings would be fine. But the thing is that partially failed tells me, hey, this backup, is there something wrong with it? We need to do it again. Whereas completed with warnings tells me, we did the best we could. Here's the warnings. If you do it again, you'll get the same warnings probably, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah. And when you're talking about, Velero fitting into another kind of larger infrastructure with a tool that's, running a backup and a restore and determining based on that status field, what do we do with this? Is this good? Are we going to have to tell the user to do it again? Are we okay to do restore now? And it's that, completion field that is what we're going to be, keying off there.
I think the distinction that Scott is helping make here is that if a failure, if there's a status of failure, the failure has to be a Velero failure. It not a Velero failure because the cluster was not in the states, was missing something that was, in a case like this, right? There was something that was supposed to be there, but it wasn't, is not a Velero failure. Velero was capable of backing everything up. It just can't back up something that is not there. So I think I'm leaning towards thinking, because I was very not sure about how to solve this, like all of us, I think. But I think now I'm leaning towards thinking that it definitely is a success. It's just like, it's a success with warning.
So just want to make sure that we time box properly so we can cover the other items here today as well. I think we've covered a lot in this issue. Who wants to take it on themselves and write up a little follow-up in the issue linked? I see everyone jumping on the opportunity here.
I'm happy to summarize. It sounds like we're reaching consensus. I'm not hearing anyone strongly arguing against the completed with warnings idea. So
yeah,
sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Christoph, for bringing this up. And thank you everyone else for chiming in. Great discussion here.
So I don't know who was talking. I was referring to Scott, but if I got somebody's name wrong, I apologize. I wasn't really paying attention to who was talking before.
All right. Next up, we have a proposal from Andrew Reed and Mark Campbell. I can pull it up here on my screen so we can go through it as well. Right. Andrew, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for your reviews on this proposal we submitted a couple of weeks ago. It feels like there's a consensus about a lot of things, reusing the backup, the code for execing from backups, and only doing post-restore hooks, not doing pre-restore hooks at this time. But I think one of the main questions still open is kind of the implementation of after you restore a pod, and then checking, if that pod should have a hook injected into it, and then waiting for that pod to be ready, or if you should just do the whole restore and then use label selectors to find which pods match that. Because Steve noted that there is a problem sometimes where pods don't get adopted into the replica set after they're restored. So the original, if that's really a problem that we need to address, then the original design's not going to work. So we're going to have to wait till everything is restored and then use the label selectors to find the set of pods that match.
Yeah, and just to chime in there, I know that is theoretically an issue. I will say that our kind of entire restic restore implementation assumes that it can just, essentially exec. It doesn't literally exec into the pod, but essentially can exec into the restored pod and wait for the restic restore to be completed. But I know that I think maybe Scott has seen the issue where sometimes that doesn't work correctly. So I guess I'm not totally sure if we do need to rethink the implementation or not, but I definitely wanted to make sure we're thinking about it.
It's definitely simpler if we don't have to address that, because if we have to wait till the end, then we need to add things like success counts to say how many pods we expect that to be successful, and then maybe do some sort of coordination between the different hooks, waiting for all the pods to be ready. And also we could support annotations on pods like we do for backups if that's not an issue.
So what would be next for this one? Next steps, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously need to resolve on the approach for that item. It's been a couple of weeks since I went through this, so I can't remember if there are any other open questions that we need to resolve or things that are still open. But I think, if we can just go through and make sure that each of the comments or questions are sort of addressed, and we can continue to discuss the approach for that specific item, which seems to be the key one to resolve at this point.
Yeah, looking over it, that was the main thing from us and the pivotal backup team. I forget their integrated team name now, but they had some thoughts, but they were mostly in line with the design. This is the main question that we have to figure out if we want to go with this approach or not.
All right. Any other questions, comments regarding this one? No.
I haven't had a chance to read through this, but I'm going to do that today.
Thank you, Ashish. All right, last item on the agenda here. We have gotten a few questions regarding Velero's governance model and how maintainers and contributors are viewed within the project. And we are putting up a PR for a proper governance model and describing the maintainers and the roles that the maintainers have as well. This is going on over here in this PR 2541 that Michael opened up on Friday after some discussions. So thank you all for reaching out and asking about how to kind of become a maintainer within Velero and what kind of levels we want to have as well. This will most likely change a little bit, but we would love for you to review this and see if there's any glaring errors that we have missed so far. We've had some internal discussions about this, and we of course want to embrace the community and welcome external maintainers for the Velero project here. So if you would like to become an external maintainer, or rather a maintainer for the Velero project, that would be fantastic. So we're putting this in place to make sure that we play by the same rules, everyone, and yeah, that's the plan going forward. If you look at the files here, we've got a governance file describing how the project will be governed. We're listing all the code repositories for the project, of course. The different community roles, users, contributors, and maintainers. We might have a fourth role in there, depending on some conversations that we've had. And of course, how voting happens if that needs to be done. but most of all, really important here, how decisions are being made within the project. Proposal process, you have all, many of you here have already proposed different things, but outlining how proposals are done and the way they are essentially moved forward as well. Then going into the maintainers file here, you will see the maintainer list, the GitHub ID, the affiliation, the organization affiliation here, and then other contributors and stakeholders within the project that might not be maintainers, like me. I'm not a maintainer, but of course I'm here to facilitate discussions and hopefully help out with the community portion of things. So with that, I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any comments, concerns, any questions regarding this, and of course, please chime in on the PR as well. Everyone happy with this? All right, cool. Yeah, this is a big thing that we've been wanting to do for a while, and we want to make sure that we're completely transparent here and opening up the project for more contributors and more maintainers, essentially. All right, I think that's it. We don't have any contributor shoutouts this week either. We're going to do a big one for the 1.4 release, as we said. So hold off on with that until next week, where we'll have a long list of awesome people. And is there anything else anyone wants to add to the meeting today? All right, and that's it for today's meeting. Thank you all for joining. This has been a fantastic meeting with a lot of great discussions. Thank you all for chiming in and helping make Velero and the Velero community even better. Thank you all and have a fantastic rest of your week.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.